The candles flicker against walls draped in silk, but the room smells not of roses, only sweat and fear. You stand at the edge of a bed too large for a child, its sheets pristine yet ominous, the air thick with incense meant to mask something darker. Outside, the cheers of a kingdom roar like a tide, but inside, it is only the sound of your own pulse, frantic and wild. You are dressed as a bride, but your hands tremble, swallowed by sleeves too heavy with jewels. The door closes behind you, iron latch against wood, and suddenly the world is reduced to this: a stranger's shadow, an unspoken command, a ceremony that was never yours to choose. Tonight, innocence will be rewritten by law, by politics, by power. And history will call it tradition. The story does not begin with a kiss, but with a contract. Before the bed is warmed, before the candles are lit, the marriage is already a war disguised as silk. It begins in a council room heavy with the smell of wax and parchment, where men, who will never wear the bridal crown, argue over names, dowries, and bloodlines. You are not present. You are being prepared somewhere else, measured for a dress, instructed to smile, to lower your gaze. They call it destiny, but it feels more like exile. Imagine the silence of a girl's chamber, broken only by the soft hiss of fabric as maids stitch embroidery too heavy for her small frame. She knows little of love, only that her body is to become a treaty, a currency exchange to stop a war or create one. Outside, bells ring in celebration, but the weight of that joy does not belong to her. In the days leading to the wedding, she is taught to kneel, to curtsy, to keep her voice gentle, every gesture rehearsed until it erases the child inside. The family speaks of honor, the priests speak of duty, but no one speaks of fear, though it hangs in the air like smoke. Even the bedchamber is prepared as a stage, the sheets white, the curtains drawn, the witnesses waiting in silence. For the girl, it is an invisible crown placed upon her head, a crown made of chains, soft enough to feel like silk, but tight enough to leave no room for breath. And as the wedding day approaches, the whispers grow, of kings too old, of queens too young, of dynasties built on trembling hands. There is no escape, only the slow walk toward the altar, where the future is sealed not by choice but by lineage. The wedding day blooms like a painting, but beneath its colors is a quiet cruelty. The palace smells of roses and wine, though the sweetness masks something sour, an unspoken understanding that this is not a celebration of love, but a performance. For power, trumpets sound, and the people gather, their cheers echoing through marble halls. But the bride is silent. She moves as she was taught, slow, graceful, every step measured, her face framed by jewels so heavy they feel like chains. The gown is a masterpiece, stitched by hands that know it will never be worn for comfort. Its silks whisper against the floor, trailing a weight that seems to say, "You belong to them now." Around her, the men smile as if they are kings of destiny. But they are collectors, weighing the value of a womb. The bride's youth is not a secret. Her small hands swallowed by rings, her shoulders narrow under layers of fabric. And yet they nod approvingly, as if fragility is a prize. The ceremony is a world of sound, priests chanting, courtiers murmuring, the rustle of parchment sealing alliances that could topple nations. She lifts her eyes once, perhaps searching for kindness, but finds only expectation. There is no room for fear here. Fear is not permitted. The marriage vows are not between hearts, but between kingdoms, and she is the signature written in flesh. When the final blessing is spoken, when the last petal falls, they do not tell her the hardest part is yet to come. For beyond the feast and the dance is the room she cannot avoid, the chamber already waiting, prepared for proof. And though the music plays, though the wine flows, she feels only the press of time, each passing hour a tightening thread. Tonight, the world will watch without watching, and what happens in silence will decide the future of crowns. The celebration fades, but the walls keep listening. As the sun dies behind the palace spires, the laughter turns into murmurs, and the music softens to a hum that feels almost cruel. The bride is led away, her steps soundless on cold stone floors, the weight of her dress dragging like a shadow. Servants bow, guards avert their eyes, but everyone knows where she is going. The corridor narrows, torches spit and flicker, and the air grows thick with incense meant to calm, though it only sharpens the fear. In her chamber, nothing feels. Like hers, the bed is vast and white, the sheets a battlefield where innocence will be tested. The curtains are drawn, but the silence is not privacy. It is expectation. Somewhere beyond those walls, men will speak of lineage and alliances, but here it is her body that must speak, and it cannot refuse. They call it tradition, but it feels like surrender. The act of becoming a queen begins with the erasure of a girl. The stranger she must call husband is not always cruel, but he is always certain, for the room belongs to him. Candles shiver, casting shadows across carved wood, and even the silk pillows seem too polished, as if prepared for spectacle. Outside, the court will drink and cheer, but within these walls, the world shrinks to a single bed, a closed door, and a vow enforced, not by love, but by duty. There is no applause for the trembling hands, no comfort for the wide-eyed fear. Tonight she will learn that the crown is not gold. It is a weight pressed against the ribs, heavy as breath, unrelenting as history, and so the first chapter ends not with triumph, but with the quiet closing of a door. The door closes, and the sound is final. It is no longer music and candles. It is the soft click of a latch that turns a queen into something smaller. The chamber is a world apart, its silence almost too loud. The air smells of lavender, though it cannot mask the iron taste of fear. The bed dominates the room, a monument to expectation. Its sheets smooth as water, waiting to be marked. You can almost feel the eyes that are not there, the invisible crowd that has gathered in whispers outside these walls. Tonight is not private, it is public property. A marriage is not real until it is proven, and the proof must be taken from a body that cannot refuse. The stranger, the husband, the king, the pawn of politics, may smile, may speak gently, but there is no equality here. He has been raised to expect, she has been trained to obey. Some brides close their eyes and pretend to be elsewhere. Others stare at the ceiling, counting the lines in the plaster as if each were a prayer. Some are children whose feet barely touch the ground. Some are women already carrying the scars of another's ambition. And history is cruel enough to remember, the proof more than the bride. In some courts, servants wait outside for the stained sheet, a piece of fabric more powerful than any treaty. Sometimes a physician is called. Sometimes a councilman stands too close to the door. The room smells of perfume, but beneath it is something colder, the sense that this is not love, but law. And as the night stretches long and heavy, the sound of footsteps in the hall reminds her. The world is waiting, not for her happiness, but for evidence. The first night was never meant for tenderness. It was meant for proof, and proof was ruthless. Across Europe, these chambers became theatres, and the bride was both actress and evidence. In France, they called it la cérémonie du lit, where nobles and courtiers sometimes followed the couple to the door, smirking, whispering, waiting for the sound of consummation. In Spain, matrons inspected sheets at dawn, their eyes sharp as knives. In England, a rumour of failure could end a dynasty before the sun rose, and for the girl at the centre, there was no hiding. Every tremor, every tear belonged to history. The room glowed with candlelight, but it was cold. The silks were soft, but they bound like ropes. Some brides were too young to understand, their voices small against the weight of expectation. Others, older but still strangers to their husbands, felt the same quiet terror. Imagine the press of rings against skin, the rustle of heavy clothes discarded too quickly, the sound of fabric tearing when fear made hands clumsy. There were those who refused and paid dearly, locked away, annulled, or quietly erased from portraits, and there were those who obeyed, who endured, who survived by becoming silent stone. The world would never call it violence. It was called duty, sanctified by priests, celebrated in poetry, recorded by chroniclers who never mentioned the shaking of hands or the salt of tears. And outside that chamber, the celebration continued, unaware or unwilling to care, as if marriage was a victory and not a verdict. For the bride, it was a night that could crown her or destroy her, and she had no say in which. By morning, the room smelled of candle wax and something heavier, a scent that clung to the sheets like a secret. The night had been a performance, and the stage now lay in silence. The bride often woke not to warmth, but to whispers, the soft shuffle of servants entering quietly, eyes lowered but watchful. Sometimes there was a sheet to display, its stain a crown or a curse. Sometimes there was nothing, and that nothing was a weapon. Failure was not private. It was an echo carried through corridors, turned into gossip, then into law. A queen could be beloved at supper and condemned by sunrise if the bed spoke against her. The body was never hers. It was evidence, scrutinized by physicians, questioned by priests, judged by councils. Some were declared barren after one night. Others were shamed for being too silent, too cold, too human. And yet, beyond the shame, there was a strange stillness. A kind of numbness that became armor. For those who endured, survival meant learning to separate the girl from the queen, to build a wall of poise over a floor of fear. There were brides who smiled at breakfast, hiding a night of tears behind powdered faces. There were those who broke, who never recovered, their names fading from history except as failures. And the cruelest truth was this: the world did not care for her happiness, only for her usefulness. As the bells rang again, as the court prepared for another day of feasting, the bride was already changed. She was no longer a child, nor fully a woman, but something else entirely. A figure in a game too vast for choice, her voice pressed into silence. And history, merciless as ever, would write her story not in feelings but in facts, stripped of the trembling hands and the sound of a door closing. The night was never truly over, because its proof lingered long after the candles died. A royal marriage was not sealed with vows or prayers. It was sealed with evidence, and the evidence was the bride's body. In the courts of Europe, this truth was unrelenting. A sheet stained or unstained could alter the fate of nations. Imagine the stillness of a dawn where servants entered the chamber quietly, hands gloved, eyes careful, lifting the linen as if it were scripture. Sometimes they found what they wanted. Sometimes they found nothing at all, and nothing was more dangerous. Annulments, scandals, whispers, they all began here, in the fragile space between expectation and biology. A young queen's worth could crumble in a single breath if she did, not bleed on command. There were those accused of deception, accused of being too pure or not pure enough, subjected to humiliations that stripped even the crown of its dignity. Physicians were called to inspect, to prod, to testify. Old women murmured over rumors. Courtiers smirked behind fans, and monarchs looked away when the truth was inconvenient. To the bride, this scrutiny was another cage. Her body was a ledger, her womb a weapon, her silence a sentence. For some, the failure was fatal: banishment, annulment, even war. For others, the proof became power, a single drop of blood turning a girl into a queen beyond question. But whether success or failure, it was never her story to tell. It was always someone else's judgment, written in the ink of gossip and law. And as the court moved on, as life in the palace carried its glittering routine, the girl at the center often disappeared into the role forced upon her. A face for portraits, a name for treaties, a body that could not afford to falter. If the first night was a performance, the days that followed were an examination. The court did not forget. They whispered in corridors, peered at the queen's face during meals, searched for signs of triumph or failure. And when rumors came, they spread like fire, unstoppable. In France, an unblemished sheet could end a marriage before it began. In Spain, a court physician might be summoned to confirm what the bride wished to hide. In England, annulments were dressed as holy justice, but everyone knew they were punishments. The body, became an open book no woman wanted to read. They asked questions she could not answer. Was she pure? Was she faithful? Was she fertile? Every silence was an admission, every explanation a plea. Those who faltered were not simply disgraced. They were rewritten. Take Anne of Cleves, dismissed for a king's lack of desire. Catherine of Aragon, humiliated when she could not give a son. Countless nameless girls accused of coldness or frailty, cast aside without pity, and those who survived learned to armor themselves. Some became queens of ice, smiling while the court inspected every gesture. Some turned to cunning, using charm as their weapon. Others faded quietly, shadows in their own palaces. The cruelest thing was that proof was never enough. A childless year could be failure. Too many daughters could be failure. Even loyalty could not save a woman whose body refused to play its part. The bedsheets were no longer stained, but the memory of that inspection lingered, shaping every look, every word. She was not allowed to be human. She was expected to be history's perfect bride. And yet behind the jewels, behind the smiles, was often just a girl who wanted to breathe, who feared the next morning more than the night before. But when proof failed, it became a weapon, and few queens could survive its edge. Courts thrived on scandal. Every rumor of infertility, every whisper of coldness or rejection was sharpened into politics. A bride who could not deliver a son was more dangerous than an enemy at the gates, for she carried the weight of dynasties on a body that might betray her. In some kingdoms, physicians poked and prodded, their cold hands turning a queen's privacy into a public trial. Some were accused of deception, accused of impurity, even accused of witchcraft to explain what medicine could not. Others were quietly locked away, their names erased from coins and prayers. The cruelest part was that the husband's failures were rarely mentioned. The burden always rested on the woman. The proof always demanded from her flesh. Think of the silent humiliation of a bride whose sheets were lifted before strangers, whose body was discussed like livestock, whose future could collapse with a single word: barren. And yet some turned this scrutiny into steel. There were queens who lied, who plotted, who hid lovers or secrets to survive. Some who bore children that were not their husbands. Some who made alliances beyond the bed. But even their victories were fragile. A tightrope over a pit of disgrace. To live as a royal bride was to live as evidence. And evidence has no mercy. The wedding night might end, but the test never did. It followed her through every season, through every childbirth, every miscarriage, every silence at court. And in that silence, the girl who had once been dressed in jewels often wondered if she was queen at all, or merely a vessel carrying the hope and fear of men who would never know her name. The years after the wedding night were quieter, but never free. A queen learned quickly that silence could be safer than truth. By now she knew the rhythm of the palace, the measured smiles, the watching eyes, the way courtiers could turn a glance into a rumor. She walked through gilded halls like a shadow, every step rehearsed, every gesture weighed. The girl who once trembled at a locked door now wore pearls and velvet, but the fear had not left. It had only learned to hide. There were moments when the old terror returned, like the hush before a council meeting or the too long stare of a chamberlain. Each child born was both victory and prison. Each failure to conceive was a wound she could not show. And sometimes she found fragments of herself in the smallest places, the feel of cool stone against her fingers, the scent of ink on a secret letter, the whisper of wind through open windows. In those moments, she was not a queen or a bride, only a woman who remembered she once had a name of her own. Others chose rebellion, quiet or loud. Some lovers were hidden behind curtains, some secrets whispered to servants, some letters burned before dawn. Yet rebellion was rarely freedom. It was survival, a way to breathe in a world built to watch her suffocate. And for all the splendor, the truth was bitter. The wedding night was never just one night. It lingered in every expectation, in every cradle and counsel, in every smile she learned to fake, and as the years passed, she understood something the child bride could never have known. That power was not given to her, it was taken, quietly, piece by piece, in the moments no one thought to look. Time made her face calmer, but inside, the battle never ended. The world believed she had settled into her role, but the crown was still a cage, polished and heavy. In the halls where her footsteps echoed, her silence became her only weapon. She learned to smile when needed, to speak little, to hide more. The young bride who once flinched at the closing of a door now sat at banquets, her expression carved like marble. But she carried scars no one could see. Some queens buried there, pain folding it neatly like a letter never sent. Others turned it into quiet defiance. There were those who found allies among servants, lovers hidden in shadows, or faith in private prayers whispered into empty rooms. Every gesture was dangerous. Every secret was a rebellion. And sometimes, rebellion meant nothing more than surviving another day without breaking. The wedding night was a memory, but its echo was everywhere. In the council's judgment, in the people's whispers, in the king's gaze when no heir arrived, a queen who failed to please was a queen who failed to rule. And failure was not an option. Some were cast aside, locked away, their faces fading from portraits. Some endured, becoming steel under velvet, shaping power where none was offered. But whether silent or bold, each carried the weight of that first night, the proof demanded, the innocence taken. And in quiet moments, when the court slept and the corridors emptied, she could sometimes feel the ghost of the girl she had been standing again at the edge of that bed, knowing that the door would close and history would not ask her name. By the time the years had passed, the girl who once trembled was gone, replaced by a figure history would call queen. Yet she knew the truth, that she had been written long before she could write herself. Her wedding night had not ended. It had only spread its shadow over everything that followed. Each child born or lost, each smile at court, each silence in council, was marked by that first proof demanded of her. Some found strength in it, turning wounds into weapons. Others were broken, their voices fading into footnotes. But even among the strong, the memory lingered. The locked door, the weight of a stranger's gaze, the knowledge that love was never the point. For those who survived, legacy became their quiet revenge. They patronized the arts, forged secret alliances, influenced kings with a word or a glance. Yet all of it was balanced on the fragile thread of their body's ability to please or produce. And when the courtiers spoke of them, they spoke of sons and treaties, rarely of the woman herself. The wedding night was never mentioned, but it was everywhere. In the coldness of arranged smiles, in the fear that one failure could send her to exile, in the understanding that her life was an offering wrapped in silk. And when she grew older, when jewels no longer mattered, and the faces of courtiers blurred, she might remember that first night, not with anger, but with a quiet, tired clarity. That the world had never asked who she was, only what she could give. And perhaps that is why some queens died as strangers even to themselves. Their names remembered but their voices lost, while history recorded only the linens, the sons, the crowns. For them, the wedding night was not a memory. It was a sentence written in gold and silence. And so we return to that first locked door, the flicker of candles, the soft hiss of silk. What began as a night of celebration was always something else, a negotiation written on the body, a ceremony that asked for proof instead of love. Behind every jewel, every anthem, every portrait, there was often just a girl whose world ended at the edge of a bed too large for her. We remember these queens for the crowns they wore, for the treaties signed in their names, but rarely for the silence they kept, the fear they swallowed, the strength they learned in shadows. Their wedding nights were not moments of intimacy, but moments of judgment, and each one left a mark that no history book could erase. Yet even in this, there is something profoundly human. The will to survive, to endure, to find small freedoms in a world that owned you. Perhaps that is why their stories still haunt us, because they remind us that power and fragility are often the same thing. So the next time you hear of a royal wedding, think of the candles, the locked doors, the quiet footsteps, and ask yourself, what did it mean to be a bride when the world was not yours? If this story moved you, subscribe for more untold histories, share it with someone who loves the shadows behind the throne, and tell us in the comments, which queen's untold night would you want history to remember?